It wasn't just a film, it was a ritual, a quiet sacrifice wrapped in the guise of cinema. Released in 1973, The Wicker Man lured audiences into a remote Scottish island where the veil between performance and belief was disturbingly thin. On the surface, it was a mystery one man's search for a missing girl. But beneath that, it was something far older, far darker, and far more enduring than any thriller dared to touch. The fields, the songs, the smiling villagers, none of it was accidental. Every detail pulsed with unsettling purpose. Even the production itself became part of the myth. Footage was lost, versions were buried, and cast members hinted at things they never fully explained. Some called it a cursed shoot. Others believed it was simply misunderstood. But no one walked away from it untouched. Christopher Lee, with eyes that flickered like a dying candle, once said he took the role not for money, but to escape being typecast as Dracula. What he delivered was something far more terrifying: conviction, a calm devotion to chaos, a kind of madness you can't scream your way out of. The Wicker Man wasn't just a story about paganism, it became one. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about The Wicker Man. 1973. Fact 1. The lost cut that was buried in a highway. There was once a version of The Wicker Man that no one alive today has seen. The original cut, reportedly over 100 minutes long, was shredded by studio executives who didn't understand what they were watching. To them, it wasn't horror, it was confusing, slow, even offensive. So they ordered the film trimmed to 88 minutes. But what happened next turned a simple edit into a cinematic tragedy. The studio didn't archive the removed footage. Instead, in a move that seems almost symbolic, they dumped the original negatives as landfill beneath the M4 motorway in England. Yes, the director's cut was literally buried under concrete and cars, lost forever. All that remains today are fragments from lower quality prints and partial reconstructions. This wasn't just a logistical blunder, it became part of the mythos. The missing scenes include key elements that hinted more directly at the villagers' psychology, the religious inversion, and the full descent of Sergeant Howie's unraveling. For decades, fans and historians have searched for those reels, hoping to unearth what might be the most elusive horror director's cut in film history. Was it censorship, carelessness, or a ritualistic burial of a film too disturbing for its own time? Fact 2. A pagan festival that wasn't just for the camera. Most horror films build their sets. The Wicker Man found one. The village of Summerisle was portrayed using real Scottish locations, including the town of Plockton. But what makes this fact eerie is what happened off-camera. Local townspeople didn't just appear as extras, they actively participated in the recreation of ancient Celtic rituals, guided by the film's detailed and chillingly accurate pagan research. Director Robin Hardy and screenwriter Anthony Schafer weren't improvising. They consulted academic texts, ancient folklore, and even druidic handbooks to ensure that every gesture, every chant, and every flower crown in the May Day festival was rooted in actual pre-Christian tradition. The result? A celebration on screen that felt dangerously authentic. During filming, some cast members reported moments where they couldn't tell if they were still acting or if they had stepped into something older, something living. Livestock was paraded through town. Children danced in masks. Villagers burned effigies at night for background realism. But it didn't feel like background. What's unsettling is that, to this day, some locals recall the shoot not as a movie production, but as a season that changed the town's mood entirely. Some even said it never really ended. So here's the question. Did the Wicker Man borrow from ancient rituals or awaken them? Fact 3. Christopher Lee did it for free and forever. When Christopher Lee accepted the role of Lord Summerisle, he didn't ask for a salary. He didn't negotiate a contract. He just said yes. It wasn't a favor. It was an escape. After years of being typecast as Dracula, Lee saw The Wicker Man as a way to break out and break open a different kind of darkness. To Lee, the film wasn't horror. It was truth disguised as folklore, a parable about faith, control, and how easily society dances into the fire if the music is pretty enough. He reportedly said it was the best performance of his entire career, a claim he repeated well into his 80s, and he meant it. But his devotion didn't stop at filming. When the studio gave the movie no marketing and buried it in a double feature with a B-movie, Don't Look Now, Lee took it personally. He went on a one-man crusade, traveling across the US at his own expense to promote the film, speaking at universities, theaters, and horror festivals, sometimes to rooms half full. He wasn't selling a product. He was guarding a belief. "I wanted people to see it," he said, "because once you see it, it changes you." So what kind of role makes a man work for nothing and keep working for it the rest of his life? Fact 4. The soundtrack that sang something ancient. Few horror films are remembered for their music, but The Wicker Man is built on it. The soundtrack isn't just atmospheric, it's ceremonial. Composed by Paul Giovanni and performed by a group of musicians who called themselves Magnet, the score combines traditional British folk melodies with lyrics pulled from actual 18th century pagan texts. These weren't songs meant to scare, they were meant to seduce. Songs like Cornrigs and Gently Johnny don't announce danger, they lure you into it. The rhythms are warm, the voice is human, but the meanings hide in plain sight. Sexuality, fertility, and death are all sung as if they were one and the same. What's most unnerving is how the music doesn't stop when the horror begins. Even as Sergeant Howie's fate becomes clear, the villagers sing with joy, as if celebrating a harvest, not a human sacrifice. It's one of the few films where the score functions not as background, but as proof of a worldview. Some film critics have called it the only horror musical ever made, but that's missing the point. The Wicker Man doesn't use music to heighten emotion. It uses it to erase resistance. So next time you hear a folk tune in a quiet field, ask yourself, is it a song or a spell? Fact 5. The Burning Man wasn't an effect, it was real. When the towering wicker effigy went up in flames at the film's climax, there were no CGI enhancements, no miniatures, and no clever compositing. The crew built it, all 40 feet of it. The fire you see on screen is real and irreversible. Constructed on the cliffs of Burrowhead in Scotland, the production team only had one chance to get it right. The structure was massive and unstable, standing precariously over the sea, and reinforced just enough to survive the wind. Once ignited, there would be no second take, no backup plan. The cast and crew stood in near silence, watching a symbol of the entire film's philosophy reduced to smoke. What's even more haunting is what they placed inside. While no human actor burned, the cage was filled with live animals, goats, pigs, birds, echoing the ancient sacrificial rites the film sought to emulate. Their screams and panic weren't special effects. They were recorded in real time. Even director Robin Hardy later admitted he was disturbed by what they'd done. Not just ethically, but spiritually. It wasn't a prop anymore. It had become a moment of ritual, captured forever. The image of Sergeant Howie inside the burning Wicker Man remains one of the most unforgettable endings in horror history. But maybe the real question is, was the sacrifice only fiction, or something the filmmakers accidentally performed? Fact 6. Edward Woodward refused to scream. Sergeant Howie is one of horror's most tragic figures, a man of law, piety, and unshakable faith, who walks directly into the jaws of belief gone wild. But when it came time to film his final moments, actor Edward Woodward made a strange request. He didn't want to scream. In fact, he didn't want to beg, cry, or plead at all. Woodward believed that Howie, as a devout Christian, would face death with stoic defiance, not fear. Even when engulfed by flames, his character would hold fast to the promise of salvation, quoting psalms and praying aloud as the villagers sang around him. That contrast, the calm of faith against the hysteria of the mob, made the scene even more terrifying. The director agreed. And so, when you watch the climax, you see a man burning alive without breaking, refusing to give his captors the satisfaction of fear. It turned the ending from a gruesome spectacle into a theological duel, with both sides convinced they're doing the righteous thing. In interviews, Woodward said the silence of Howie's suffering was more powerful than any scream could be, and he was right. It made the horror feel ancient, not cinematic, because sometimes the most chilling sound is not a cry, but the unwavering voice of a man who refuses to break. Fact 7. Britt Ekland's voice wasn't hers. When Britt Ekland appeared as the seductive Willow McGregor, her performance left a lasting impression, particularly the infamous scene where she dances nude, separated by only a thin wall from the tormented Sergeant Howie. Her accent was lilting, hypnotic, and distinctly Scottish, but it wasn't hers. The producers dubbed her voice without her consent, replacing her natural Swedish-English accent with a local Scottish voice actress to match the setting more closely. Ekland was furious when she found out, only discovering the change during a public screening. She called it a betrayal. The studio called it necessary for immersion. To make matters worse, the now iconic nude scene wasn't fully her either. Ekland was pregnant at the time and refused to do full nudity, so the production hired a body double for the more explicit shots. Years later, she expressed disdain not only for the dubbing, but for how the scene was shot and edited, calling it exploitative. Yet ironically, that sequence has become one of the most talked about moments in British cinema. A mix of pagan symbolism, raw temptation, and masculine repression, it still polarizes critics to this day. Was it necessary to alter her voice to protect the illusion of the village? Or did the film unwittingly mirror its own themes, sacrificing a woman's voice for the sake of belief? Fact 8. The producer was ashamed until it was too late. It's hard to imagine now, but The Wicker Man was once an embarrassment to the studio that funded it. Producer Michael Dealey, who would later work on hits like The Deer Hunter and Blade Runner, believed The Wicker Man was a mess, too slow, too weird, and completely unmarketable. He fought with the creative team, he pushed for cuts, and when it was finally released, he buried it, pairing it with a random double feature and refusing to fund proper marketing. The film opened with barely a whisper. No posters, no buzz, no critical push. But something strange happened. Over the next decade, The Wicker Man refused to die. Word of mouth turned it into a midnight favorite, particularly among university students and horror scholars. By the 1,990 seconds, it had become a certified cult classic, praised for its structure, themes, and unique tone. Dealey later admitted his mistake, even comparing the studio's treatment of the film to a kind of sacrificial act itself, destroying what it didn't understand. It's a twist of fate that mirrors the movie's message perfectly. The fear of the unfamiliar often leads to destruction. So who's the real cautionary tale here? The doomed policemen on screen, or the men behind the screen who tried to kill the very thing they made? Fact 9. A Christian allegory wrapped in pagan flames. On the surface, The Wicker Man appears to be a condemnation of paganism. A devout Christian walks into a world of hedonistic rituals and meets a gruesome end. But beneath that obvious reading lies a reversal, and it's one the filmmakers planted deliberately. Sergeant Howie is meant to be the moral compass, but the more we watch, the more rigid, judgmental, and blindly obedient he becomes. He's not investigating with reason, he's enforcing with doctrine. His refusal to engage, to empathize, or even to question his own beliefs ultimately leads him to the pyre. In contrast, the villagers, though clearly unorthodox, are unified, peaceful, and celebratory. They aren't hiding their truth. He is. Some scholars argue that the film is not about pagan evil, but about Christian arrogance. The real horror isn't the ritual, it's Howie's inability to imagine a world outside his own moral framework. So, which is more terrifying? An island of people who worship the sun, or a man who refuses to see any light but his own? Fact 10. A script written like a chess match. Anthony Schaefer, the screenwriter of The Wicker Man, wasn't just writing a horror script. He was constructing a philosophical duel, a film where every scene is a move on a board and every line is part of a larger trap. Schaefer had already written Sleuth, 1972, a masterclass in mind games and manipulation. With The Wicker Man, he took that style and embedded it in a horror framework. Sergeant Howie is lured to Summerisle, not by accident, but by a carefully orchestrated sequence of false clues, planted witnesses, and misleading rituals. Nothing happens by chance. The entire plot is a ritual in itself, with Howie as the chosen piece moved exactly where the villagers want him. By the time he realizes it, the final move, the sacrifice, is already in motion. And what makes it more disturbing is that Schaefer leaves no room for rescue. There's no twist of fate, no hero moment, just inevitability. It's rare for horror to be this calculated. Schaefer didn't write a ghost story, he wrote a theological trap. So ask yourself, how much of your reality is built on someone else's script? Fact 11. The film was nearly a Christmas release. It sounds absurd now, but The Wicker Man, a film about pagan sacrifice, burning effigies, and religious inversion, was once scheduled for a Christmas release. British Lion, the distribution company, had slotted the film into the holiday calendar without considering the implications. A movie drenched in fertility rites and ritual burning, premiering during the season of peace and nativity. Director Robin Hardy was stunned. Christopher Lee was reportedly furious. The idea of counter-programming horror during Christmas wasn't just tone-deaf, it risked burying the film under moral outrage before it ever had a chance to breathe. Eventually, the studio relented, and the film saw a limited spring release instead. But the damage had already been done. The mishandling became one of many studio blunders that pushed the film into obscurity for years. Still, the irony lingers. The Wicker Man is about the collision of belief systems, Christianity and paganism, faith and flesh, repression and release. What better battleground than a holiday where both traditions already collide? So maybe the Christmas release wasn't an accident, but the final layer of the film's strange duality. Fact 12. The director never forgave the studio. Robin Hardy directed only a handful of films in his lifetime, but none came close to the impact or the mistreatment of The Wicker Man. While critics and audiences eventually hailed it as a masterpiece, Hardy himself remained bitter about how it had been handled. He claimed that the original negative was mutilated, that his artistic vision had been violated by ignorance, and that studio executives treated the film like an embarrassment. The most painful blow came when they paired it in theaters with Don't Look Now, placing The Wicker Man as the B-movie, despite Hardy's protest that his film wasn't meant to be horror in the conventional sense. For decades, Hardy worked to restore the film's legacy, helping to locate alternate prints, overseeing partial restorations, and giving interviews that revealed just how fractured the production had been. But the original cut, the one he considered his true version, remains lost. In his final years, Hardy still referred to The Wicker Man as the best film I ever made, but he also called it the film I never got to finish. So the question lingers, can a masterpiece still be complete if its creator says it isn't? Fact 13. Pagan symbols hidden in plain sight. You don't need to look hard to find symbols in The Wicker Man, they're everywhere. But most viewers don't realize just how intentional they were. From the spiral motifs on doors to the animal masks worn during the May Day festival, every visual detail in the film was carefully selected to reflect real-world pagan symbology, many of which predate Christianity by thousands of years. The production team studied Celtic, Norse, and Druidic traditions to embed layers of meaning into the environment. The maypole dances, for instance, weren't stylized choreography, they were ritual reenactments. The corn dolls weren't props, they were based on harvest offerings. Even the labyrinthine layout of the village subtly mimicked pagan notions of cyclical time and rebirth. What's eerie is how casually these symbols are presented. They don't draw attention to themselves, they're just part of life on Summerisle. And that's the most chilling part. For the villagers, these aren't decorations. They're truths, markers of a belief system deeper than word. Some scholars suggest that the film itself functions like a ritual, pulling the viewer into the same symbolic spiral as Sergeant Howie, whether they realize it or not. So ask yourself, when does a symbol stop being art and start becoming belief? Fact 14. The ending was spoiled by the poster. In one of cinema's great ironies, the twist ending of The Wicker Man, arguably one of the most shocking climaxes in horror history, was spoiled by the film's own promotional material. Early posters and lobby cards for the US release featured a giant burning effigy, front and center, often with Sergeant Howie's silhouette inside. No ambiguity, no mystery, just the final image, used as a marketing hook. Christopher Lee and Robin Hardy were furious. They had fought to preserve the surprise, crafting a slow-burn narrative that misled viewers into thinking the film was a missing person detective story. The reveal that Howie was being lured as the intended sacrifice all along was meant to hit like a hammer. Instead, American audiences went in already expecting fire. The studio defended the decision, saying the image was striking and commercially necessary. But in doing so, they robbed the story of its intended momentum. Even today, first-time viewers often know what's coming, not because of the film itself, but because of the marketing choices made decades ago. So here's the real horror. Can a masterpiece survive if its most powerful secret is given away at the door? Fact 15. The film was rejected by the Cannes Film Festival. Despite its later cult status and scholarly acclaim, The Wicker Man was rejected by the Cannes Film Festival in 1974. The reason? It was deemed too strange and culturally opaque. A film about pagan rituals, religious inversion, and human sacrifice didn't fit the mold of European art house or mainstream cinema. Director Robin Hardy later admitted that he had hoped Cannes would give the film legitimacy after its lackluster UK release. Instead, the rejection deepened its obscurity. For years, The Wicker Man was considered too arty for horror fans and too horrific for art film purists. It belonged nowhere, and that, ironically, became its strength. Because the film defies genre, its longevity comes from a kind of liminality. It's not quite horror, not quite mystery, not quite musical. It's a genre of its own. But in 1974, that made it dangerous, unclassifiable, uncomfortable, so it never walked the red carpet at Cannes. But decades later, it burned its way into cinema history anyway. Maybe some films are never meant to win awards, just to haunt those who ignored them. Fact 16. The May Day sequence was shot in a single day. The chaotic, eerie climax of The Wicker Man, the May Day festival, the procession, the animal masks, the dancing, and ultimately the burning, feels like it unfolds in real time. That's because it nearly did. The entire sequence was shot in a single day, under immense pressure and unpredictable weather conditions. The production had limited access to the coastal cliffs of Burrowhead. The Wicker Man structure was already precarious, and there was no room for error. Once it burned, there would be no second takes. So the crew had to shoot every major sequence, parade, ritual, sacrifice in a mad, continuous push from dawn until nightfall. Actors wore heavy costumes in strong winds. The flame cues had to be timed with dialogue. Live animals were restless. The sun kept disappearing behind clouds. And the final shot, Howie's prayer against the setting sun, had to align perfectly with the real horizon. Against the odds, they pulled it off. The tension you feel in that sequence, it's not just acting, it's urgency, fatigue, and weather bleeding into performance. So here's the irony. A scene about an ancient ritual, planned for centuries in the film, was shot in just one frantic day. Fact 17. The film sparked real-life religious backlash. Shortly after its release, The Wicker Man began drawing more than just film reviews. It drew fire from religious organizations across the UK. While the studio expected mild discomfort due to its content, they didn't anticipate letters of protest, organized boycotts, and sermons warning parishioners against seeing it. Many Christian groups labeled the film blasphemous, not just for its depiction of paganism, but for how it portrayed Christianity as rigid, cold, and ultimately powerless. Some critics accused it of moral relativism, arguing that it blurred the lines between faith and fanaticism. Others claimed it mocked both traditions. Ironically, the filmmakers insisted they weren't attacking religion but exposing the danger of any belief system taken to extremes. That nuance, however, was lost on many early viewers. The fact that Sergeant Howie dies a martyr, quoting scripture as he's burned alive, only deepened the controversy. Decades later, the backlash has become part of the film's identity. It wasn't just a cult movie, it was a film that provoked theology, even without trying to preach. So the question remains, was The Wicker Man a warning against paganism, or a mirror held up to faith itself? Fact 18, the remake was a disaster, but it helped the original. In 2006, The Wicker Man was remade with Nicolas Cage in the lead role, but instead of rekindling interest in the original, it became a punchline. The remake was ridiculed for its absurd dialogue, not the bees, bizarre tonal shifts, and incoherent plotting. Critics tore it apart. Audiences laughed, sometimes unintentionally. But something strange happened. The mockery of the remake led curious viewers back to the 1973 version. People who had never heard of the original began seeking it out, wondering what made the source material so different. In a way, the failure of the remake functioned as accidental marketing for the original classic. Robin Hardy himself distanced the two, calling the remake a misunderstanding of everything the original was about. And he was right. The subtlety, the symbolism, the creeping dread, none of it survived the update. Still, Hardy acknowledged one ironic truth. Without the 2006 disaster, a whole generation might never have discovered his film at all. So perhaps, in a strange twist of fate, the worst version of The Wicker Man saved the best one. Fact 19. The ending mirrors a real historical ritual. The finale of The Wicker Man feels like pure horror fiction, burning a man alive inside a wooden effigy. But the terrifying truth is that the concept wasn't invented for the film. It was inspired by real historical accounts of human sacrifice from ancient Celtic and Druidic traditions. Roman historians like Julius Caesar described wicker men, massive structures made of wood and straw, used by Druids to burn animals and sometimes humans, as offerings to the gods. While some modern scholars debate the accuracy of these claims, the myth had endured for centuries, and the filmmakers tapped into it, reviving a ritual that might have once been real. The image of the Wicker Man burning against the sea isn't just a cinematic invention, it's a historical echo, a visual resurrection of a sacrificial practice that most believed long buried. Whether those rituals ever truly happened, or were Roman propaganda to demonize the Druids, remains contested. But that ambiguity only makes the film's ending more haunting, because what's more disturbing, that the final scene was fictional, or that it might not have been? Fact 20. No one knew it would become a classic. When The Wicker Man wrapped production in 1972, few involved thought it would matter. It had no studio support, no real marketing, and no guaranteed release. Cast and crew quietly moved on to other projects. The director struggled to find funding for future films. Christopher Lee went back to genre roles. No one celebrated. But the film refused to fade. Like an ember buried in the ashes, it found heat in the shadows. Film schools began teaching it. Horror scholars cited it. Filmmakers like Edgar Wright, Ari Aster, and Ben Wheatley openly praised its influence. It appeared on greatest horror films of all time lists, often next to films with 10 times the budget and prestige. What started as a discarded project became a litmus test for horror intelligence. A film that didn't just scare but lingered, that didn't scream but whispered. And for those who truly saw it, The Wicker Man became more than a movie. It became a reckoning. So maybe that's the final twist. The film about forgotten rituals became one itself. Bonus fact, the flame never went out. In 2013, 40 years after its original release, a restored version of The Wicker Man premiered in theaters under a new name, The Final Cut. It was assembled from scraps, damaged negatives, surviving prints, and audio fragments all stitched together like a cinematic resurrection. But even then, it wasn't truly complete. The lost footage, the missing original negative, the director's full vision, none of it has ever been fully recovered. And maybe that's the point. The Wicker Man was never meant to be whole. It lives in fragments, in whispered stories, in the flicker of firelight on faces that may or may not be acting. The villagers of Summerisle believed that sacrifice brought renewal, that fire purified, that stories, once performed, gained power. So, what exactly did The Wicker Man become? A cursed film? A ritual of its own? Or just the longest burning fire in British cinema? If any of these facts left you unsettled, that's because The Wicker Man was never just a film. It was a question disguised as a story. Tell us in the comments, which fact haunted you the most? Was it the lost footage, the live animals, or the ritual that might have been real? And while you're here, subscribe for more untold truths behind cinema's strangest corners. Because the next film we uncover might be hiding something even darker.